Hello team, welcome to my session on Coffee with Prabh, and today we're going to discuss about command and control server. This topic is basically part of my threat intel series, and this is a new initiative part of my video because I have received a lot of feedback on Prabh, can you start something on CTI? So I thought let me make a videos on CTI. So according to CTI, the first important base topic I already covered, which is threat intel, and further continuation to that, I'm making a second video which is called command and control server. My name is Prabh Nair, and for more information, you can check my LinkedIn profile. If you're new to the channel, do subscribe to my YouTube channel and click on the bell icon to make sure you should not miss my future videos on a similar topic. So without wasting a time, let's start with the first part. Thank you. Okay, so before we going to discuss about command and control, what is that? So first let's go by the description. So it refer to a computer controlled by a cyber attackers or a group of attacker which is used to send commands to a system compromised by malware and to receive the stolen data from the system. So let's understand with the layman perspective. So let's take example. We have an attacker here. Okay, the IP address of the attacker machine is 1.1.1.1. Okay, and here we have an internet. Okay, so now what happened is there we have a firewall. So what happened is on the firewall it block all the multiple connections. Okay, so the user. So it's difficult for the attacker to initiate any kind of a malicious connection request from the external to internal. Okay, so that is not possible. So what happened is he convinced the user to install one app. So when he basically installed the app, okay, it basically without his consent, there is a Trojan or any application is installed in a system. And that system, that application, when it installed in the system, it is basically open one port. Okay, it basically open one particular port. And now what happened through that particular port? Give me a second. Through that particular port, we able to establish the connection with the remote system which is called 1.1. So this is the computer we have, which now sending instructions through this particular connection, and that connection, that informations and activity will be execute on the user machine. So this is the system which is basically called as a C2C server, command and control server. And this channel is basically called as a covert channel. So nowadays what happened when you're downloading any patch, any application, any setup.exe, okay, in that this application, client and application is already binded. Binded basically mean two exe is basically merged. Remember when we used to have this Microsoft system of Windows XP or Windows Vista and all that, it come with some additions, and to run that additions full time and all that, you need to run some cracks. And to run the crack, you need to move file to the C drive, D drive, and from there you can run the crack. So the crack might be have this client application. So when client run the application, it install one application on the system and it open the port. And through that particular port, it established the connection. And then it is a computer of the hacker who use that command. From there, he basically send the command and he executes things on the system. So this computer, the one which hacker has, which is used to control the remote system, that is called as a C2C server. That's why I say it is referred to a computer controlled by the cyber attackers or group of attackers, which is used to send command to a system compromised by malware and receive the stolen data from the system. Now it's up to him to hide his identity. Instead of having its own system, he give the IP of other system just to hide his activity. So that is also possible. So that is why you can see here when you're talking about C2 server is a computer controlled by the cyber criminal or a group of cyber criminals, and it is used to send commands to a system compromised by malware to receive the data from the system. And it is involved one or more covert channel. So we have a two type of channel team. One is basically called as a covert channel, and one is basically called as a overt channel. Overt channel. Okay. So thin line difference between the covert and overt is, suppose we have a system A, which is the attacker system, and we have a system B, which is basically my target. Okay. Without his consent, I am able to install one application, and without his consent, I am able to establish a connection on the B system through the back door. So we open some ports through which we try to gain access. So when I'm trying to gain access through that port, it doesn't ask for the username password. So if you see the layman perspective is, we have a telnet. So in telnet, we enter the IP and it asks for the username password, and then it establishes the connection. So that is called as a covert. So that is basically called overt, where I enter the credential, take the consent and access. But in the covert, without entering the credential, without his permission, I can able to establish the connection. The best example is, you tell the user to install AnyDesk. You tell the user to approve this connection. So that is called as a overt, O-V-E-R-T. But without his consent, you gain access to system. That is called covert. So covert channel is basically introduced to exploit the confidentiality. That's why saying the main server of C2 server is to remotely control malware infected computers. And these servers send command to the bots, receive the stolen data, issue updates, direct bots to carry out a specific action. Now we have a multiple thing we can accomplish through the command and control. The first is called malware. So if I successfully install some kind of a remote management software in that system, from my system to that system, I can deliver the malware also. Today, hackers basically, when they're performing a ransomware attack, they first establish the C2C, and then through that particular connection, they try to encrypt the data, or they try to execute some application which encrypt the data of the target system. Okay, so with the control of a compromised machine within the victim network, the attacker can trigger and download some additional malware on that system. That is possible. Second is, from that system, we can able to capture the data also, like sensitive data such as financial document. We can copy or transfer to the attacker server and all that, because here we have an attacker and here we have a system which is basically a victim. So I already installed the C2C, and I have a control over the system. So through that control over system, I can send the malware. I can able to retrieve the data. So data thefting is possible. Along with that, we also have a technique called shutdown. Remotely, I can shut down the machines also. Even I can bring down the company network. I can also reboot the system. If the infected computer may be suddenly repeated shutdown reboot, which can be disrupt the normal business operation. Sometimes what happen on the firewall, we block all the malicious connection, but connection is initiated through the virtual tunnel. The tunnel is basically there. So in that case, firewall cannot able to detect any kind of a attack. So it is basically bypass the defense mechanism also, where the attacker commonly attempt to mimic the normal expected traffic to avoid the detection. So that is also possible. Okay, and depending upon the victim network, attacker establish the command and control with the various level of stealth to circumvent the security tool. And we can also use to perform the DOS attacks. We can basically overwhelm server or network by flooding them with the internal traffic. And so we are using a multiple parameters by which we can do that. So we're targeting on the application layer protocols. Okay, we are communicating through removable media. So example, I will keep the application, a C2C application in the pen drive, and I gift that user. So what happens is, when user connect the pen drive, automatically the application install, and through that I will gain access. So this is also one technique by which we compromise. We can decode the data, obfuscate the data, okay, redirect to some other server. From there we download the C2C server, fallback channel. So these are the different type of way we can able to compromise according to the Splunk. Now we have a different type of C2C server. Okay, so first is basically called as a centralized. Centralized server is basically mean, let me give example. So in centralized, what happened? We have one server. So example, like server IP is 1.1.1.1. Okay, so hacker, what he did, he distribute the malware to the multiple users. So we have a user 1, we have a user 2, we have a user 3, we have a user 4. All 4 servers are connected with this server. So that is basically called as a centralized. Okay, so we have a centralized C2 server, which is most common type of C2 server we have, and they are controlled by the single attacker who has a complete control over the malware that is installed on the compromised system. Second is basically called as a P2P. So P2P is basically which is used to distribute command and data among the network of a compromised system. The reason why a hacker used to build such kind of a thing, because they don't want to get tracked, because they know if all, so just imagine if system 1, system 2, system 3, system 4 all are sending data on 1.1, we can able to identify this as suspicious, right? So that is why we basically have a dedicated systems. Okay, this one. So this is basically called as a P2P. And this type of C2 server is more difficult to shut down because there is no single point of failure. That's why attacker today using the P2P. Sometimes we basically use the hybrid, where we combine the element of centralized and C2 server, and they are often used by attacker who want to make their malware more difficult to detect. Okay, but one thing is that in all the three, the IPs are same. So that is why it is easy to track down by the security team. But now we have a new sophisticated attack, which is called as a dynamic C2 server, where they change the server IP and also the location. Okay, so this is something which is used in today industry. Okay, so these are the different type of C2 servers we have. Now, when we're talking about the importance of the C2 server in the cybersecurity, as I said, C2 server is often the central point of contract or central point of control in a network of compromised system, which is making critical target for cybersecurity effort. Second is currently we don't have an indicator of compromise that much. So communication between the compromised system and C2 server is a strong indicator of security breach. And disruption of C2 communication. So disruption, the communication between the malware and C2 server can effectively neutralize a significant portion of threat which is posed by the malware. So this is why this is play a very important role. Now question is challenge with dealing with C2 server. See, the first, as I said, evasion technique. So C2 server often use a technique like fast flex where they change the DNS record. So it is difficult for us to understand from which domain the traffic is coming. Sometimes because the servers are in different locations, different countries, their countries has a different jurisdiction issues. So it's different. Sometimes it's very difficult to take down the server. Third is because they change the process every time. They change the IP every time. It is difficult to track what is the source of the server. So these are basically the primary challenge we have when you're dealing with the C2 server to attack or stop. So let's understand the process by which this entire activity works. So I'm going to discuss about step-by-step process, how the C2 server basically initiate the connections or establish the connections and all that. So if you can see, the process begin by malware infect a target computer, and after the infection the malware typically attempt to establish the connection with C2 server. Okay, malware can be Trojan here. Okay, malware can be Trojan. Trojan is basically used for the remote administrations also. Okay, so let's take example. We have a system A, which is the attacker machine. Okay, this is basically my victim. So I send a phishing email, he click on that, or I basically install something in malware in the pen drive, he connect the pen drive. So there's a malware which loaded in the victim machine. And now what happened is it open a dynamic port on the target system. This port is called as a Trojan port. And this through that port, we basically create a reverse connection, because from firewall we can able to block like that. So we need to create a reverse connection. Is it clear? So we create a reverse connection, and through the reverse connection, we're trying to pull the data. Is it clear? So the same thing we have discussed. So process begin when malware infect the target computer, and after infection, the malware typically attempt to establish the connection with C2 server. Here the A is the C2 server. C2 server, and once the malware installed on the victim machine, it attempts to establish the contact with the C2 server, and this is often done using a hard-coded IP, so that if firewall is basically there, it cannot able to monitor. Now once it establishes the connection, they basically does the beaconing. Now beaconing is an English word, it means act of signal. Okay, so the same thing now. So the device is basically infected, it starts sending a data. So process of sending information, that is called as a beaconing. And we have a different type of beaconing in threat intel. We do the DNS beaconing. So we're intercepting a DNS data. We have a web server beaconing. So we're monitoring the web server traffic. Okay, so how it works, let's take example. So you get a better visibility is, suppose here we have a server. Okay, so this is the client, and this is basically the attacker machine, which is a command control server. So the connection is basically established, they're pulling a data. So monitoring, intercepting, analyzing all this data is basically called as a beaconing. So the infected device starts sending a periodic signal or beacon to the C2 server. Now if they're sending a DNS data, it's called DNS beaconing. If they're sending a web server traffic, it's called web server beaconing. So these beacon may contain the basic information about the infected system or await the further infections. So evasion technique is to avoid detection. The communication may be disguised like a normal internet traffic, or it will be an encrypted traffic. So firewall will not able to inspect. So countermeasure is we need to have some kind of a proxy here by which we can able to block the connection. Okay. So example, like if the firewall is there and this is basically my victim and this is basically a server. Okay. So the session which is basically there, it is an encrypted session. So firewall will not able to read that. Okay. So that is why here we install the proxy. So connection established to this part. So here we can able to decode. The third thing, we have a receiving command and data exfiltration. So C2 server send the command back to the bot, and these command can instruct the bot to perform the various. It can be, you know, extracting data, retrieving informations and all that. Okay. Then further, if you want to install any further malware and all that, you can update the malwares. And based on that, you can able to use a system to perform the further attack. Okay. Once you basically done with that, you maintain the persistent access of the system. So that something is basically done here. I repeat again, maintaining the persistent access. So that is basically part of the requirement. So let's take an example. We have a system A, which is the attacker server, and then we have a firewall, and then we basically have a victim. So now we have a persistent access of that. Now I can use this particular system to launch further attack. This is called as a lateral movement, moving from one network to another, or I will use a system to launch other system attacks. So maintaining persistence basically means we try to target on the kernel level, because if you talk about kernel, this is basically kernel. Okay, this is the driver, this is the system. So if you compromise the kernel, antivirus work here. So antivirus will not be able to detect anything on that systems. Is it clear? So that something is basically do here. So persistence mechanism is basically play a very important role. Then further, if you want to disrupt, so security team can use a tool and technique to detect and disrupt the communication between the bots and C2 server. So this is basically where my reactive measure come. We identify with the help of logs and SIM, some IPs are targeting my internal systems. So we try to isolate a system. We're not power off. We're removing the network cable. We will not power off the system, because last access information stored in the memory. So memory basically stores the gold mine information. Is it clear? So that's something we need to retrieve. Okay. So that is basically part of that. So we have some proactive measures like firewall, intrusion detection, prevention systems, endpoint solutions to be monitored the block the suspicious activity. We can have a strong access control with two-factor authentication. We can run the system with least privilege. We can have a digital code signing. So whenever you want to download any applications, because what happens is attack is triggered through the running of unauthorized application, right? So here you're running the application, so you have to verify whether it is coming from the respective source. Okay. Security awareness training of the employees, do not click on such links. Network segmentation should be there, or host level segmentation. So these are some of the countermeasures we have. Along with that, we can also have some advanced detective techniques like EDR tools can be have. We can continuously monitor network traffic for unusual patterns. We utilize a threat intel field to identify, like, you know, similar IPs are there which targeting my server, so I can able to block that. And we're working with the cybersecurity firm for regular pen testing the things. So these are some of the action plan we have that we can use. Nowadays what happened, there's a lot of interview questions asked on this area. So example, like, can you explain what command and control server is, why it is pose significant threat to the organization like ours? We already explained that. Describe the experience where you identify respond to C2 server. What steps did you take and what are the outcomes? So here they will check your experience, check your knowledge. What network security measures are effectively in detecting or preventing communication with C2 servers? Can you provide some example like deploying the EDR, monitoring threat-based solutions? Discuss about EDR in combating the C2 server attacks. You know, how have you implemented or managed the EDR in the past? So these are the activities we have. Then after the isolating affecting endpoint in C2, what step would you take to analyze the incident and identify the breach point? So that is something there. How do you utilize threat intel to stay updated, stay ahead of C2 server target? Can you give us an explanation of how this intel has influenced security measure in previous roles? So this is basically test your knowledge, test your experience. Is it clear? Then they will also going to describe how you would collaborate with the external cybersecurity expert for the penetration testing, threat analysis. What values does this to add to your cybersecurity effort? So these are some of the interview questions we have which basically ask for. So you need to see how you basically validate. Okay. So do let me know how do you find this particular video, and shall I make more videos on threat intel, because my next video I'm planning a beaconing. Do let me know, shall I make a video on beaconing? And if you're new to the channel, do subscribe to the YouTube channel and click on the bell icon to make sure you should not miss my future videos on a similar topic. Thank you. Good day. Bye.